The Creature from Jeckyl Island by G. Edward Griffin. Introduction. Does the world really need another book on the Federal Reserve System? I have struggled with that question for several years. My own library is mute testimony to the fact that there has been no shortage of writers willing to set off onto the dark forest to do battle with the evil dragon. But for the most part, their books have been ignored by the mainstream, and the giant snorter remains undaunted in his lair. There seemed to be little reason to think that I could succeed where so many others have failed. Yet the idea was haunting. There was no doubt in my mind that the Federal Reserve is one of the most dangerous creatures ever to stalk our land. Furthermore, as my probing brought me into contact with more and more hard data, I came to realize that I was investigating one of the greatest whodunits of history. And to make matters worse, I discovered who did. Someone has to get this story through to the public. The problem, however, is that the public doesn't want to hear it. After all, this is bad news, and we certainly get enough of that as it is. Another obstacle to communication is that this tale truly is incredible, which means unbelievable. The magnitude by which reality deviates from the accepted myth is so great that, for most people, it simply is beyond credibility. Anyone carrying this message is immediately suspected of paranoia. Who will listen to a madman? And finally, there is the subject matter itself. It can become pretty complex. Well, at least that's how it seems at first. Treatises on this topic often read like curriculum textbooks for banking and finance. It is easy to become ensnared in a sticky web of terminology and abstractions. Only monetary professionals are motivated to master the new language, and even they often find themselves in serious disagreement. For example, in a recent letter circulated by a group of monetary experts who for years have conducted an ongoing exchange of ideas regarding monetary reform, the editor said, quote, "It is frustrating that we cannot find more agreement among ourselves in this vital issue. We seem to differ so much on definitions and on really an unbiased, frank, honest, correct understanding of just how our current monetary system does function." End quote. So why am I now making my own charge into the dragon's teeth? It's because I believe there is a definite change in the wind of public attitude. As the gathering economic storm draws nearer, more and more people will tune into the weather report, even if it is bad news. Furthermore, the evidence of the truth of this story is now so overpowering that I trust my readers will have no choice but to accept it, all questions of sanity aside. If the village idiot says the bell has fallen from the steeple and comes dragging the bell behind him, well... Lastly, I have discovered that this subject is not as complicated as it first appeared to be, and I am resolved to avoid the pitfall of trotting the usual convoluted path. What follows, therefore, will be the story of a crime and not a course on criminology. It was intended that this book would be half its present size and be completed in about 1 year. From the beginning, however, it took on a life force of its own, and I became but a servant to its will. It refused to stay within the confines prescribed, and, like the genie released from its bottle, grew to enormous size. When the job was done and it was possible to assess the entire manuscript, I was surprised to realize that 4 books had been written instead of 1. First, there's a crash course on money, the basics of banking and currency. Without that, it would be impossible to understand the fraud that now passes for acceptable practice within the banking system. Second, there is a book on how the world's central banks, the Federal Reserve System being one of them, are catalysts for war. That is what puts real fire into the subject, because it shows that we are dealing not with mere money, but with blood, human suffering, and freedom itself. Third, there is a history of central banking in America. That is essential to a realization that the concept behind the Federal Reserve was tried 3 times before in America. We need to know that, and especially need to know why those institutions were eventually junked. Finally, there is an analysis of the Federal Reserve itself and its dismal record since 1913. This is probably the least important part of all, but it is the reason we're here. It is the least important not because the subject lacks significance, but because it has been written before by writers far more qualified and more skilled than I. As mentioned previously, however, those volumes generally have remained unread except by technical historians, and the creature has continued to dine upon its hapless victims. There are 7 discernible threads that are woven throughout the fabric of this study. They represent the reason for abolition of the Federal Reserve System. When stated in their purest form, without embellishment or explanation, they sound absurd to the casual observer. It is the purpose of this book, however, to show that these statements are all too easy to substantiate. The Federal Reserve System should be abolished for the following reasons. It is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives, Chapter 1. It is a cartel operating against the public interest, Chapter 3. It is the supreme instrument of usury, Chapter 10. It generates our most unfair tax, Chapter 10. It encourages war, Chapter 14. It destabilizes the economy, Chapter 23. It is an instrument of totalitarianism, Chapters 5 and 26. This is a story about limitless money and hidden global power. The good news is that it is as fascinating as any work of fiction could be, and this, I trust, will add both pleasure and excitement to the learning process. The bad news is that every detail of what follows is true. The Creature from Jeckyl Island by G. Edward Griffin. Introduction. The following exchange was published in the British humor magazine, Punch, on April 3, 1957. It is reprinted here as an appropriate introduction and as a mental exercise to limber the mind for the material contained in this book. Question: what are banks for? Answer: to make money. Question: for the customers? Answer: for the banks. Question: why doesn't bank advertising mention this? Answer: it would not be in good taste, but it is mentioned by implication in references to the reserves of $249 million or thereabouts. That is the money that they have made. Question: out of the customers? Answer: I suppose so. Question: they also mention assets of $500 million or thereabouts. Have they made that too? Answer: not exactly. That is the money they use to make money. Question: I see. And they keep it in a safe somewhere? Answer: not at all. They lend it to customers. Question: then they haven't got it? Answer: well, no. Question: then how is it assets? Answer: they maintain that it would be if they got it back. Question: but they must have some money in a safe somewhere. Answer: yes, usually 500 million or thereabouts. That is called liabilities. Question: but if they've got it, how can they be liable for it? Answer: well, because it isn't theirs. Question: then why do they have it? Answer: it has been lent to them by customers. Question: You mean customers lend banks money? Answer: In effect, they put money into their accounts, so it is really lent to the banks. Question: And what do the banks do with it? Answer: They lend it to other customers. Question: But you said that money that they lent to other people was assets. Answer: Yes. Question: Then assets and liabilities must be the same thing. Answer: Well, you can't really say that. Question: But you've just said it. If I put $100 into my account, the bank is liable to have to pay it back, so it's liabilities. But they go and lend it to someone else, and he is liable to have to pay it back, so it's assets. It's the same $100, isn't it? Answer: Yes, but... Question: Then it cancels out. It means, doesn't it, that banks haven't really any money at all? Answer: Theoretically. Question: Never mind theoretically. And if they haven't any money, where do they get their reserves of $249 million or thereabouts? Answer: I told you. That is the money they have made. Question: How? Answer: Well, when they lend your $100 to someone, they charge him interest. Question: How much? Answer: It depends on the bank rate, say 5.5%. That's their profit. Question: Why isn't it my profit? Isn't it my money? Answer: It's the theory of banking practice that when I lend them my $100, why don't I charge them interest? Answer: Well, you do. Question: You don't say. How much? It depends on the bank rate. Say 0.5%. Question: Grasping of me, rather. Answer: But that's only if you're not going to draw the money out again. Question: But of course I'm going to draw it out again. If I hadn't wanted to draw it out again, I could have buried it in the garden, couldn't I? Answer: Well, they wouldn't like you to draw it out again. Question: Why not? If I keep it there, you say it's a liability. Wouldn't they be glad if I reduced their liabilities by removing it? Answer: No, because if you remove it, they can't lend it to anyone else. Question: But if I wanted to remove it, they'd have to let me. Answer: Well, certainly. Question: But suppose they've already lent it to another customer. Answer: Then they'll let you have someone else's money. Question: But suppose he wants his too, and they've let me have it. Answer: You're being purposely obtuse. Question: I think I'm being acute. What if everyone wanted their money at once? Answer: It's the theory of banking practice that they never would. Question: So what banks bank on is not having to meet their commitments? Answer: I wouldn't say that. Question: Well, naturally. Well, if there's nothing else you think you can tell me. Answer: Quite so. Now, you can go off and open a banking account. Question: Just one last question. Of course. Wouldn't I do better to go off and open up a bank?